So while we are waiting, I was unable to find notes from the June meeting. I found the CodiMD, but that's essentially empty.
Okay, it looks like those I hadn't uploaded those. Okay, I've dropped the ball on that one. My bad.
Yeah, no problem. I just wanted to confirm that they don't exist, so I can stop searching.
Yeah, no, I haven't. Because if you remember at the start of the meeting, I said because I'm not very good at taking notes in line.
Yeah.
I wait for the VOD and then I sit down and do it that way. And I said I'd do that afterwards, and I did. It's sitting on my hard drive.
Oh, good.
I just didn't put it onto Data Tracker.
So would this be a good opportunity to do it?
I can't do it now, I'm afraid. I'm on the wrong machine. But
Oh, okay.
yeah, because I'm on my work machine. But I can definitely do it after this meeting.
Because my slides are recurring to the slides I used 3 months ago, but I couldn't find what we actually decided on that. So that was why I was a little bit late in preparing for this meeting, where a little bit is a very nice way of putting something ugly.
Yeah, I promise I'll fish it out and get it onto Data Tracker either later today or tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, there's Glenn. Morning, Glenn.
Glenn, is your audio working? Your video is working. Now, can you say something as well? I'm not sure he's hearing us.
No, he's not. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Now we can. Okay. Good morning, Glenn.
I'll just try and sort out my sound then.
No worries. I mean, we're not in a rush. Surprisingly, Francesca's not here.
Oh, and Stefan is here now too. Okay, good. Morning, Stefan.
Yeah, that's better.
Shall we wait it out a few more minutes?
So 1 or 2 more.
Yeah.
Hello, Stefan. Can you hear us?
Now you should hear me.
Yep.
Ah, yeah, there. Now we hear you. Good.
Perfect.
Well, I guess we might as well get started. Do you want to do the honors there, James?
Yeah, sure. So let's just get started. So this is the September interim meeting for JSONPath. Let's see if I get the key combinations right here. So note well, this is an official IETF meeting, so the note well applies here, just as it does to every other IETF meeting. If you've got any questions, you can obviously speak to myself, Tim, or Francesca, our AD. We should go through the administrava. The Jabber, I'll just monitor the Jabber. There's only a few of us, so it shouldn't be a concern. Blue sheets are automatic because we're using Meet Echo this time. Notes. Shall we just do what we've done in the past, and I'll do some. Tim and I will do summary notes and distribute that after.
Works for me.
Cool. Do we have any agenda bashing? Noting that this is the agenda.
We have slides from Karsten on truthiness.
Yep.
I guess a meta issue.
Maybe Carsten recently added a new issue regarding the in operator. Maybe if we have time, we could also discuss in operator.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah, I think we actually need to start with my slides because it has some questions that we probably need to answer before we can discuss truthiness and the in operator.
Fine.
Okay. Shall we start with your slides then, Carsten?
Can I add another item?
Sure.
Maybe after the issues, we could discuss the consensus, degree of consensus in the working group. And it may be that item won't be needed.
Okay.
I'm not sure what you mean, Glenn.
Oh, I'm a bit concerned that we don't seem to be converging particularly rapidly towards a consensus in several areas. And I'm hoping the discussion of issues this morning will prove me wrong. But if I'm not proven wrong, I'd like to discuss how we go about the process of the working group and achieving better consensus.
Sure. Okay.
Okay. Carsten, did you want to go first and go through yours, or do we want to start in this order?
I would prefer to show my slides first because I need those questions answered before. So let me just request those.
There you go.
I think you haven't put them in yet.
I did.
Well, Meet Echo doesn't seem to know.
I approved them, but James already had.
Yeah, I approved them before we started. It might a cron job might not have fired somewhere.
Yeah. Okay, so
you can share your screen, Carsten, right?
I can. Just takes me a little longer. Okay, so when I tried to prepare for this meeting, I was a bit unsure. Suddenly we want to go through all the, I don't know how many there are at the moment, a large two-digit number of issues at some point, but it seems we are always stumbling about some fundamentals here. And I think it would be a good thing to discuss these fundamentals briefly before we go into the issues. In the interim we had 3 months ago, we already raised the question, what is our stance on implicit conversions? And at the time I made the slides, my sense of the emerging consensus was we were not going to want implicit conversions. So that's maybe an extreme that we are not completely doing, but on the other hand, embracing implicit conversions as much as PHP or JavaScript have done that may not be the right thing to do. And then, of course, the question came up. Occasionally, we want to test something, and do we have an implicit conversion to Boolean, maybe as an exception to this rule? And that's where this truthy term came in. So this is what we had 3 months ago. And we have had a lot of discussion about what the JSON path query itself actually provides. And the abstract model I have in mind, and that's also reflected in the draft, is that a selector returns a node list, and that node list is then the input to the next selector. So that model seems to work. And the question we now have to answer is, how do we import that thing into the expression language? So it's somewhat natural to mold the expression language around JSON and JSON types, but there is no JSON type for a node list. So we have to come up with a way to handle node lists in the expression language. And we also have...
Yeah, 1 second. Question there.
Yes, one second. We also have the inverse problem that we do not necessarily have to carry the entirety of the JSON type system into the expression language. So my presumption here is that we will have an expression language type system that is a super subset of the JSON type system. So Glenn, now please go ahead.
Yeah, I agree that the node list is input to the next selector, but I was under the impression that for every selector, the node list was then passed as individual nodes to the selector, which would then act on them, and then we'd compose the result of the effects on each node in the node list into the node list for the next selector. So the node list doesn't really get presented to the selector. It's just individual nodes, one at a time.
Right. I completely agree with that. But that's about passing selector outputs to the next selector. This is not necessarily what describes the expression language. And if we can write a query in the expression language, then we get presented with a node list, and we have to figure out what to do with the node list.
See, I disagree. I say that the selector is passed a node of the node list, an individual node.
Yes.
And any expression within expression language within that selector gets that node. Can't see the other nodes of the node list.
Well, yeah. So let me go to my next slides, because
yeah, okay.
I think I'm clarifying this a little bit. But so right now, what we are doing is the add-based queries, which actually operate on what Glenn has been talking about, are limited to add.foo and the index expression. So that's nice. Because the result is a node list of 0 or 1 node. And for a node list of 1 node, we actually have an easy way to convert this into a JSON value, because a node contains a JSON value. So that's the simple case. But we also have $-based queries, and these actually provide node lists. So either we need to get rid of the $-based queries, or only allow $-based queries that produce a single node. So we have a pretty open design space here, but I think we need to cover what people are doing today with the JSON path. Now, assuming that... Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I agree now.
So... that node list, whether it be a single or no node, or actually the whole concept of node list, I think we expect to have an implicit conversion in the exist expression. So that could be exactly the difference between a single node or no node. So if the query returns a node, then the exist expression is true, otherwise it is false. So that is easy, but there is another place where path occurs in the current grammar, which is the right-hand side of a comparison expression. And there we could essentially translate this to a union type. The type contains all JSON values because that's what we will find at that node. But also something like undefined. Yeah, and we have to work with the fact that there may be several nodes in there. So I don't have a full proposal here. I just want to point out that allowing a path on the right-hand side of a comparison expression means we need some other conversion mechanism. We certainly don't want to do the conversion to Boolean there. Yeah, so let me just quickly go forward. So my conjecture is that if we continue to disallow structured values in the grammar for the expression language, then we have a subset of the JSON values that we actually can compare with, that we can notate as literals, excuse me, that only includes primitive values. I also note that we have no computation in the expression language at this point in time, so we cannot add things or divide things or compute modulos or things like that, which sometimes can come in handy, but we have to agree whether that's something we want to have or not. That will increase the complexity. The real thing we can do with the data types that we can notate is compare them against literals in comparison expressions. Yeah, and we also need to be able to compare query results because we have path as a potential right-hand side of the comparison expression. Okay, and then from this background, we can start discussing the slides I had 3 months ago with respect to the decisions, the decision space we have on this slide. Glyn.
Yeah, you said we only allow comparison against literals, but we would allow some comparison, for instance, at.foo = at.bar.
Yes, so that would be the comparison against a query result.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
I see two ways where we indeed need structured values or complex values in the expression language. One is the in operator we are starting to discuss now, and the other is the existence operator or existence test, where we as an exception to the rule only use simple values. We also can test for complex values. This we wrote it in the draft. Can't find it so quickly. Okay. I think we should discuss how we should handle the contrarily discussed existence operator. I see value having an existence test in the expression language. What's your opinion about this? Should we leave it, or should we only put it in the truthy, falsy test?
Well, my opinion, if you ask me, is that we have a result from the comparison project, which shows that about a third of the implementations don't really implement anything that we could use as a basis for this decision. About a third is providing an actual existence test, and about the other third, not quite, maybe another third, essentially provides half a dozen different ways of doing the truthiness test. So if I just look at existing implementations, I would say the only real candidate is going for the existence test. And that also fits with my personal view of what would be a good thing to have in a JSON path query language. So I'm quite happy to see that result of the comparison project.
I'm looking in the draft. The what I think is probably the draft, and there's really very little in there that suggests you would do anything but single literal values. Is somebody put in a proposal? Because I don't recall seeing it for changes to the draft to talk about doing comparison against structured values.
Well, people are carrying around examples that have something like equals bracket 1,2 bracket, but the draft currently does not provide that in the syntax, and it also has this comment in the notes to the one big piece of syntax: comparisons are restricted to primitive values such as number, string, true, false, null. So it then says comparisons with complex values will fail, but we cannot even notate these complex values at the moment. So that's not a question that needs to be raised and answered. So as long as the grammar doesn't provide structured values, I think, yes, indeed, the draft is limited to simple values, primitive values.
I think that it is a good thing to restrict the right-hand side of comparison values, not only the right-hand side, to simple values only. Comparing against complex values might get very complex.
Obviously, once you open the door, you're essentially asking for a deep equals, I guess, right? Which is certainly possible to define unambiguously, but is also sort of unbounded runtime complexity.
Yes.
So Karsten, what do you want to do? You want to change the draft to allow structure comparisons, or?
No, definitely not. I want to complete the discussions that seem to assume we did that, we should be doing that.
If I remember correctly, it's Greg has been pushing for structured values and comparisons, and he's not here to talk about it.
I mean, I certainly understand the desire to say the 1,2, but it seems like at the moment I don't think I'd be in favor of it. But yeah. Is there anybody here who wants to make an argument for doing this?
For allowing complex values?
Yes.
No, I'm happy with having not such complex things like complex values in comparison.
Yeah, I think it's a cost-benefit question. I think
Yes.
the cost is high and the benefit is marginal.
Well,
That's
the
a good
cost
point.
of specifying it isn't that high. I mean, what you'd have to do to the spec is fairly straightforward, but
The implementation.
you're right. Yeah, the implementation could be.
Good. So in my notes, I'm just writing into the CodiMD notes document. I just wrote meeting consensus seems to be to stick with primitive values for comparisons. No, that's one half, and then my slide has this next line. What about $.foo equals @.foo? So that's a comparison that doesn't have a simple value, but that actually has a query on the right-hand side. I think we need to understand what that means. Well, I would expect that for @.foo, we can simply extract the JSON value if there is a node, but we have to define all the cases where there is not a node or there are multiple nodes to look at. So this becomes more complicated if we have a path-to-path comparison.
My first reaction would be to disallow this. It's not compatible with the statement to only allow primitive values. Another example would be to have on the left-hand side, instead of $.foo, union. If we allow this ... thing, we should also allow any selector, like union selector, and we shouldn't do this. This is my first reaction.
Well, we currently don't.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, yeah, within a path, within a path we can have union selector, at least within the $ path, not within the add path. The add path is much more restricted in the current grammar.
In this path, we also could have expressions again.
Yes.
It's hard. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you may remember proposal A avoids multiple values in comparisons by limiting what you can apply to $ as well as to @, which is quite neat. And you get a syntax error if you stray outside that. So that's one kind of highly restrictive solution.
So $ expressions are not allowed?
$. Expressions are allowed, but only where they will yield, definitely yield an individual value.
Okay. I would agree to exactly this.
So that means that they'll be syntactically disallowed. Wait a second, but you can't tell in the syntax whether it's going to yield a single value. Can you?
But there are some expressions, some selectors that only will give you a single value.
Yeah, the single value might be an array, but it's still a single value.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, of course.
Yeah.
So syntactically, purely testing does not work. We need to get the values to judge if it is a complex value or a simple one.
So what that means is that if I say $.foo equals, that can only work if $.foo happens to be a scalar, like 3 or
No,
a string.
no. $.foo could be a complex value, structured value, but it would have to be a single structured value. It couldn't be a node list.
Sure.
Yeah, so there are two different things. Can it be a list, and can it be a structured value?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd have to look at proposal A again to see what its restrictions are precisely. But
is there a link for proposal A? Somebody could paste into the chat.
yeah, let me find it. It's one of the items in the JSON path comparison. It's put together by the same author. Here we are.
Yeah, I have the comparison on my screen. But...
oh, right, okay. There was a bit of a delay there, so I put it up twice. Sorry.
I have to find the chat. Oh, there it is. What are we looking at in here, Glenn?
So if you look at the selector.peg under implementation, that's the easiest way to see the syntax of proposal A.
Selector, okay, right, got it. Is there any particular line number you're looking at, Glenn?
Well, I'm looking at really the comparisons which are in, let's see, line 54, for example.
Yes. Yes, okay.
So that comes down to allowing filter value on left and right. Filter value is defined on line 71 and 72. And so 74 is where it really starts to get interesting, where a document value is the non-constant comparison term. And that allows a scalar operator, not a general selector. So scalar operators are defined on line 78 as being dot single child name, or rather dot child names, that's a singular thing, or a bracket child name. So it doesn't allow array slices, for example, or recursive descent or unions.
Right. I find myself friendly to this. It sure is easy to understand.
Yeah. And once you allow comparison of multiple values, there is some strange stuff in the logic as well that I pointed out before, which is not consistent with the way logic is normally done. I think I've raised that in an issue. So, but there are certainly downsides of allowing comparisons of multiple values.
So essentially, the issue is whether we adopt what is essentially proposed in line 78, 79, 80 here, I think.
Yeah.
Does anybody dislike that?
No, seems to be okay to disallow complex values, but only in the comparison expression, not in the contain expression. Contain expression needs containers, means complex values or array or object.
Yeah, do you mean the in operator?
The in operator, yes.
So
On the right-hand side, there must be an array or object which is a complex value.
Yeah.
This is one. The other one is to allow existence test if the data queried for is a complex value and exists, then that should be selected. True.
And that
Yeah, I
is
think
supported in the
that's
current draft, right?
I need to find the.
I don't think there is anything in the current draft that actually defines exist expr, but I think it's pretty obvious that this is about whether the node exists and not what's in there.
Yes.
Yeah, line 58 of the peg of proposal A has the existence term.
Nice.
I'm pretty sure I've read something about the exist expression. But it's
So
not in
I
the current
think-
draft. Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, the draft hides this under discussion of falsy and truthy, which is then not used anymore. Sorry,
Yeah, okay.
Good.
So
I think the
what's-
intent is to say existence is really about existence.
Should we discuss existence now? Do we agree in only having or only allowing simple values in the expression language, except in operator and maybe existence?
But we haven't talked about the in operator yet. The grammar actually, let me try to find that. The grammar really only has a path in the exist and comparison expressions. The grammar is broken in the in-op expression. It doesn't work the way it's written down. So I think the intention was that this was also going to be a path. But I think the idea behind proposal A to restrict path to what they call document value is a nice way also to simplify the in-op.
I recently, a few minutes before Carsten published the regular expression and containment expression are missing left-hand side. I put in my answer some examples. Carsten, could you show this issue?
Well, takes me a while to do that. Which issue was this?
Your new issue from 70 hours ago.
Oh, number 120.
Regular expression and containment expression are missing left-hand side.
Issue 120.
Issue 120, yes.
All right, Stefan, you have some nice examples here.
So I made some examples resulting in my opinion, or in the fact that on the left-hand side only a scalar value should be there, and on the right-hand side only complex values, array or object, should be allowed, resulting in a proposal for the syntax for expression language.
So would array literal be limited to arrays of primitives?
As a container?
Yeah.
Array literal. Relative path value and JSON path maybe result in an object also, but literal object on the right-hand side might not make sense.
Okay, but it says at the moment array literal is one of the options for container. And I just wondered if that was a general array literal or whether it was limited to
array literal. We should only write array because it's a JSON data type.
Yeah, right. But Stefan, he's asking the content of the array literal. Can the elements of it only be primitives, or could you have a nested array or something like that?
I see. Okay.
And
well, if the left-hand side only can be primitive, then it's not really that useful to have a structured value in the array.
Yes, exactly. As a consequence of the fact that the left-hand side must be a primitive value, the contents of the array must also be such primitive values.
Yeah, because okay. So the left-hand side, we don't know the type of the left-hand side until we evaluate it, do we? Runtime.
We don't know, but we evaluate it, and it must be a primitive value then.
Yeah.
But so if you evaluate, $.color, and it turns out to be a huge object, then that thing will just fail, right? I mean, it will just.
Yeah.
Yes, left-hand side is restricted to primitive value. Left-hand side holding a complex value will fail. It has no selection occurs.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree.
So it doesn't make sense for the array literal to hold non-primitives.
Right.
So we may as well restrict it to being primitives.
Exactly. We need not to exclude it explicitly, because if the left-hand side must be a primitive value, there will be no match with
The
elements.
point is we have to write down the syntax for these array literals. And I think what we just found out is that we can limit ourselves to a syntax that only allows primitive values in the literal.
Do we really need to write down the syntax, because it's a JSON array literal? Can we? But okay, we for clarification we should do it.
It's actually a subset, strict subset of JSON array literals, though, isn't it?
Correct. It's a JSON array of primitives.
But it might be a JSON array of complex values, but there would be no match because the left-hand side is a primitive value. So the result is no selection occurs.
Yeah,
But
but that's really
It
confusing.
simply makes no sense, but we shouldn't, we need not exclude that case.
Right. I
In
disagree. I disagree, because just think about the case where the left-hand side yields a complex value, such as an object, and the user has coded an array literal comprising that particular object as a single element, and then we're saying that in yields false. That seems counterintuitive. Whereas if we fail at parsing time, if it's not valid to put in an array literal with a complex value, then we get out of that whole question.
That makes sense. Okay, so we really need to write the syntax down, only allowing simple values in that array. Okay, I agree.
Okay.
So is that Karsten typing at the bottom there?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So we make sure. So are we going to agree that it's actually a syntax error to have a non-simple value on the right-hand side?
The syntax error to have a. Say that again.
I think we are agreeing that we would actually create a syntax error if there's an array on the right-hand side and one of the elements is not a primitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose another minor question for array literal is, do we allow empty array literals, which always give false? But yeah, I don't care either way. But
I think we should, because I can,
Yeah.
that simplifies code generation. If I'm generating one of these things, I'm just going to say, for anything I want to match, put it in the array, and if there's nothing, you get an empty array and it doesn't match. I think that's
Agreed.
perfectly reasonable.
Okay.
So I certainly agree with what Karsten has written.
Yes, I agree. Fine.
The last sentence says that paths on the right-hand side may yield multiple nodes, and the node list is examined like a JSON array would be.
So yeah. What's an example of that, Karsten?
Well, 42 in add.indices.
So how
Well,
can
no, that's maybe a different example. So I don't think we have an example up there.
I can put the 42 in parentheses, and then I have a valid key of an object, and I can test it against this. Oh, no. 42 in at indices. I have an array of numbers, and I test if 42 is explicitly in that array as a number.
Yeah, I mean, would it be reasonable for the right-hand side to have the same restriction as a comparison term if we go in the direction of proposal A? Because then it's a single value which may or may not be an array. I think all those values there are in that category.
So I think we're converging on the idea that the path on the right-hand side can also yield an array, and we would match against every single element of that, like we would match against a literal array.
Providing that the array pointed to by the path yields only simple values, yes.
Well, maybe not. No, I'm not sure I agree here. Is that if you're providing a literal, you can only provide simple values. But you know, $.foo could be an object, and you could you're not going to rule that out syntactically, right? You're not going to match. But
in an object, yes, and in an array, the second line, at dot color in dollar dot colors. We implicitly disallow dollar dot colors containing non-simple values. No.
By disallow, you mean
the second line.
Yeah, but I mean, when you say disallow, you don't mean syntactically. You mean it just would not match.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So if colors, if $.colors was an array object.
I see the difference, Tim, you make. If we have a literal array, we can test the content syntactically, yes. Okay.
Just looking at this example that Carson's typing, if at.colors was an array of complex values, and $.color was one of those complex values, I think we're proposing that in should return false, which is highly counterintuitive.
Yep. I don't like that.
That is counterintuitive, but supporting it is going to force implementers to do arbitrarily complex deep equals calculations at runtime.
$.color, the left-hand side always must be resolved to a simple value, and this will result in no selection occurs.
Did you say single or simple?
Simple.
I think we are using the terminology primitive and structured.
Okay, primitive value. Left-hand side must be resolved to a not simple. Yeah, primitive value.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm completely at home with that, but I'll take it down as a note.
Well, I mean, if $.color happened to be, some huge complex data model full of arrays and substructures and so on and so forth, we just fail it. You don't even evaluate it. You just no match.
$.color containing not a primitive value results in no selection. Mhm.
Right. So that's very useful.
Yeah.
Carmen has written down sort of the case that is a little bit uncomfortable, but I nonetheless I agree.
So with this example, we would allow left-hand side being a complex value also. So we left-hand side isn't restricted to a primitive value anymore.
So what it says is that we cannot avoid that happening, but
Right.
it is not a match.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you write counterintuitive. It's counterintuitive, yes.
So we ought to write down at this point that we are trying to avoid deep equals.
Yeah. Okay. Yes.
With an exclamation mark. Okay.
Just for my information, what's wrong with deep equals?
I don't see a big problem either, but
Well, it's unbounded runtime complexity, right? I mean, if you're dealing with very large objects, you know, if $.a in $.b and $.b is megabytes and megabytes of stuff, it's
So you're concerned about something like a CPU attack?
We couldn't argue to allow or make allow deep equals in with the in operator and disallow it with comparisons.
yeah, Stefan is right. We should be consistent here. Either we allow it in comparisons and in, or we allow it in neither.
Yeah. I just think it'd be good to document why deep equals is a problem.
We should have a note in the draft about this. Yes.
yeah, but somebody else than me has to write that because I don't see a big problem there.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Tim, is it something like a CPU attack that you're concerned about?
I don't know.
You know, if the user chooses to compare megabytes and megabytes and it takes a long time, they get what they pay for.
Well, it's certainly an expansion of the semantics of the current draft, because, you know, the current draft only shows numbers and strings and things like that. You know, just in all things, I tend to the minimalist, and in general, don't want to make the draft bigger than it is. And are we going to be happy writing down? You know, I think we all feel in our heads as programmers we could implement deep equals, but do we want to specify that?
an interesting example that Carsten wrote here. In this case, on the right-hand side, there is no explicit container, but a node list generated by the ... operator, and we agreed to disallow the ... selector with comparison, so I tend to disallow it also with the in operator. We make sure that.
So here's what I think. I think we should take this very specific question back to the working group and say, are we okay with allowing queries that would force implementation of deep equals at runtime?
So you are at the previous question. Mr. Stefan already went to the next question. So we were discussing the deep equals thing, and I have another question.
On the left-hand side is not an explicit container, but a query, a path resulting in a node list. And should we allow this syntax? I'm tending to disallow it because we also disallowed such queries, such selectors in paths with comparisons that would be consistent with the restrictions with comparisons, I think. So
yeah, except that comparisons are always primitive, while in this case we actually do allow a list of elements on the right-hand side, so it would be consistent to actually allow a node list as well. But I don't know how to separate the two cases, so it adds complexity.
But if we allow the double dot operator, we also allow unions and slices, arrays. It might get too complex. But maybe we need to discuss it more deeply.
Yeah, let me just submit this comment, and what I actually will do is create another issue for that. Oops.
Okay.
I seem to have lost the previous page.
So Carsten, in general, I get the feeling that you are less restrictive in your thinking. That you'd probably be okay with in effect deep equals both on equality and on inclusion.
Yes. Well, to a certain extent. So it depends a lot on the trade-off here between implementation complexity on one end, and I think we have hit something that is actually reasonably easy to implement on a constraint system now. And the problem that in JSON you sometimes have to go to structured values to represent non-trivial data, and so putting in a somewhat artificial limitation here would then lead people to actually representing colors not as an array of 3 values, but as a string of 3 decimal integers with slashes between them or something, which makes life very much harder for a constrained implementation. So I think there's a trade-off here, and I'm not entirely decided on which end of the trade-off I'm at. But forcing users to actually do weird representation decisions just because the tool they are using is not capable of handling the obvious representation, that's a negative that I try to avoid if possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but I'm pretty happy with what is on this issue here, and I think we should spend a little bit more time thinking about 122. But I think that what we have written down there is actually a reasonable result as well. But I'm sure would like to hear from the working group what they think about this.
At least what we have now here is a very clear proposal that
Yeah.
I think crystallizes the issue.
I would like to discuss in short example regarding true, false, and not existence. I see, in fact, some value about this, and I also intend to write an answer to the issue. Consider a member of an object named answer given, maybe in a test or something. Answer given maybe have 3 values, or 2 values. Answer given is true, answer given is false, or or no answer has been given. So the answer given member simply does not exist. So I think this is an example where all 3 true, false, and undefined have its value. So 11 of 42 implementations do properly, can handle that case properly. The rest does not do it. So what can we do? We can follow the proposal from Carsten to use a function for that, an exist function. But we didn't even discuss functions in the expression language, so we need to postpone that. What is your opinion? Is there an agreement to have the existence test in the expression language, or should we skip it?
Well, I think it should be in there. We have it in the exist expression, and we should stick with exactly that. So if you want to know about the existence of a node, you have to write an existence expression.
Okay.
If you want to know whether what's there is true, false, undefined, undefined doesn't exist in JSON, true, false, null, or 17, you have to use a comparison expression.
Okay. So there is an agreement about this.
Well, I hope.
Okay.
Although in the notes right now, the existence test allows complex values. I haven't seen an example.
Well, you never see that value. You only see that the node exists. And you already have to be able to handle complex nodes in the selector language.
Yeah.
So that's not added complexity.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at the notes under 3.5.9.1, and they would benefit from some examples.
Hmm.
What was it? 3.5 point?
9.1.
Okay.
Filter selector. Some bullets in there under notes.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, so where have we got to here?
Well, there's one thing that needs to be added, which is that a non-existing value is not equal to any literal.
Right.
Hmm.
And I mean, just to be pedantic, but a non-existing on the left is also not equal to a non-existing on the right.
We should also state that at dot does not exist is equals false is also is false. Also
For me, that the last thing I wrote on line 70 is true, but is false and not true. But yeah.
undefined is not equal undefined.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would have, I think a worse example is at does not exist is not equal to at does not exist.
Which languages is undefined not equal to undefined in?
Simply skip the also in the comparison.
Yes, but I'm interested in the general case. So the other case
Okay.
is just a special case of that.
Yes, Carsten's right.
I just think the special case would, make people recoil in horror even more than the general case. But
So which languages have undefined not equal to undefined?
Well, not a number. Not a number is not equal to not a number, right?
Yes,
this is
that's
a good,
true of NAM, but not of undefined.
I think of this as being more like not a number, but okay.
I must admit, I don't know of enough languages whether undefined is equal to undefined.
I'm fishing in my head for examples. I'm not finding any.
JavaScript results in true. Undefined is equals undefined is true.
Ah,
In which language?
JavaScript. Node. Node.js. I
Yeah.
started Node.js and typed in undefined equals undefined and gives true.
Yeah, but then there are different kinds of undefined in JavaScript, so of equals in JavaScript. So
The two equals. Okay,
yeah,
I will.
which is not the one that we are using here.
Yeah. Right. It's also true with three
Yeah.
equal signs.
I'm just thinking of writing, a JSON path. $.foo equals $.bar. Neither of them are there. Do I want that to succeed? No,
But,
I don't think I want it to succeed.
No, maybe it makes sense if we have an object and want to test the case. If two members are missing, then this is what the user wants.
Then you use a conjunction of two existence tests.
Yes, I want to
I should
test
say
if,
not exist and
if,
not exist, right?
if this does not exist, and then also this needs to also not exist, and this maybe should result indeed in true. At.a or not at.a. Also, no, I would then use the AND operator and test not equals, but A is missing and B is missing. Okay. Hmm. Hmm.
So if we don't have that, then we would have to write something like $foo equals $bar or not $foo and not $bar.
So what you're saying is they both have to be present and equal, or they both have to be absent. Right.
Yeah, that's what line 73 says is probably what most users would expect.
Yes.
Oops.
I can't really see your line numbers, but 73.
Yeah, it's a wonderful color scheme.
Right. In 73, now I can see it now. But users would be wrong, right?
Yeah.
Well, not in my world, but a world is conceivable where that they would be wrong. So essentially, you are saying if anything in a comparison expression returns undefined, then the whole comparison expression is false. And of course, that immediately runs into the problem that there is equals and not equals, and then there are even greater equal and things like that. And there are some fundamental transformations you no longer can do if you make things that way. So you can no longer transfer less than or equal into not greater and all these ugly things that happen. So
yeah, axioms start to break.
So what do people think about 73 then? I mean, do people think that, if they're both absent, that should be true?
Again, that's what I would think.
Really? Oh.
I'm not sure. I'd want to work through the consequences of that. I mean, going back to in, how about $.foo in the empty array, where $.foo doesn't exist?
Well, that's
Is that
two
true or
different
false?
things.
Yeah, yeah.
So you run through the array by doing a logical OR of matching to each individual element of the array, and that logical OR, if it has 0 arguments, actually yields false. Otherwise,
Yeah.
logical OR doesn't work.
Okay,
and
not bad that.
we cannot notate absent in the array, which is a limitation. But I think a limitation we can live with.
Yeah, okay.
In JavaScript, you can leave out array elements, but converting that to JSON will fill it with null. The gaps,
Okay.
the sparse arrays. What about time restrictions? How long will this session last?
We have until we have about half an hour left.
Okay.
40 minutes.
I've lost track of where we are in the agenda.
Well, we haven't got past the first item yet.
Okay.
Oh, well, we have pretty much covered some of the other ones. So we haven't talked about regex yet.
I think that we have an open issue here on your line 73 thing there.
Yep.
Is absent equal absent? And I think I agree with Glenn, which is that you'd want to think through the consequences of that a little bit more carefully. I mean, from my mathematical point of view, I find the idea horrifying.
Yeah.
Because clearly absent cannot be greater than anything. It cannot be less than anything. So how can it be equal to anything? You know.
Tim is right. Not a number is equals not a number is false in JavaScript, and we could argue that not exist or absent is more in the direction of not a number than a simple value. A distinct value.
I predict that issue will run and run.
No.
Just wait for Greg and Daniel to get involved.
That was fun. Do you see what I pasted in at line 84?
84.
In the notes, if you look at the shared screen.
Yeah.
My favorite is not a number not equal, not a number true.
Yeah.
Yeah, one would expect that you can convert any of the equals to a not equals and get the inverse value. But if you convert the less into a greater equal, then both are false.
Yeah. Well, mathematics isn't all it was cracked up to be, is it?
Okay, so have we extracted all the gold from this mine shaft?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so we've got a couple of open issues on the comparison on the allowability of deep equals and on the semantics of things being absent. Okay, shall we move along the agenda then?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the other two candidates are determinism and regular expressions. Should we talk about regular expressions a little bit? I don't hear any objection.
So do you have an issue number?
Oh, do we have an issue number? Hold on a second.
Should be 70, Carsten.
Yeah.
Yeah, long discussion, which we probably cannot all read through at the moment.
Yeah. My trouble is that I've been thinking about this, and in my heart, I would like to just leave regular expressions out, to be honest, because expecting consistent results from one programming language to another is probably going to make people unhappy. So realistically, that's just true.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if there was a single accepted regular expression standard that we could point to, we'd be home and dry, but there isn't. And we're trying to solve that problem in this working group.
If I remember correctly, in previous discussions, we said, or at least hinted at, regular expressions being something for extensions in the future.
I mean, there was some really good discussion there about this particular flavor from various XML things and JSON schema and so on. But I don't know where I can go get a Java library or a Go library and say, okay, only accept the XML schema flavor.
Yeah, that's one problem, and the other problem is that the XML schema flavor actually has one extension that essentially nobody else has, which is the subtractive character classes, and that's making the life of implementers hard.
Right.
Otherwise, I would be very sure that this is the one we should be going for.
So Karsten, in theory, I can see the argument, but in terms of getting a library, and if I'm writing just an implementation in Ruby or Go or Rust or whatever, is there a way in the standard regular expression library to say only accept this flavor? And I don't know how to do that.
Well, I just had the same discussion about ABNF with someone, and the result of that discussion was that it actually was simpler to actually implement the thing than to continue discussing how to do this. Because ABNF is actually surprisingly easy to implement if you think about it. So my approach to this would actually be to define a subclass of regular expressions that is actually simple enough to implement, that everybody can do that. And of course, you implement it by transforming the regular expression into the regular expression syntax that you already have. Yeah, this is not the first idea you get when thinking about this problem. But after a lot of thinking, I think that's the only reasonable way to handle regular expressions.
So what would you have in the specification then?
Well,
have in the draft?
I wrote a draft.
Oh.
So that's the basically the proposal I'm making. The draft is not complete because I wanted to know whether this working group actually wants to go this way or not. But I think it should be giving you an idea of where this would be going.
What I like with Carsten's approach to formulate only a distinct set of regular expressions in the draft is that implementers will surely take a regular expression library that will have more features than those written in the allowed or specified in the draft. So this might be extensions to the draft, but this is any implementation can do extensions to that allowed by the draft. So if it's really easy to implement, why not do it? Users will, I think they will like it, having regular expressions. I can't see any pitfalls.
I guess my concern about this is that we've kind of got one standard which is spawning another standards activity, and we've still got the JSON path audience are the only people that I'm aware of will take an interest in this, but it's actually quite a general regex standard that we're proposing here. It might be simple, but it's general. It's not limited to JSON paths, so it seems a bit strange to do it in a corner of the JSON path working group and then expose it to the world and then lean upon it. That's my concern. Does that come across? Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Sure. It's a concern. It's not a stopping concern, but it's a concern, and we all have to be aware of.
So I'm looking at the iRegex graph there, and there's what I'm just counting. There's 30 or 40 lines of ABNF there.
Yes.
Something like that. So I think what you're saying is the ideal behavior we would like to see in implementers is that if they see a regex, if it doesn't match the grammar, they throw it out. It's a syntax error. And if it does match the grammar, they toss it to the nearest regex library, and with the expectation that they should get interoperable behavior.
Yeah, that's not quite how it works, because you actually do have to make some transformation. Because, for instance, the way Unicode is handled in different regex flavors is different. So you don't just match it against the ABNF, you actually use the ABNF to transform it into your favorite syntax. And I hope I can find some time to simplify the grammar from those 30 or 40 lines. That's certainly over the top.
Okay. So somehow I had missed your concrete proposals there, Karsten. So now that we have that, so I think that if we're going to allow regefs, we have to say what we mean. So if we're going to allow it, we have to adopt either Karsten's proposal or some competitive thing. Do people agree with that formulation?
Yes. Yeah.
The third alternative would be to provide an extension point, but that would, throw away one significant advantage of the JSON path we are arriving at, which is that it's monolithic. You don't choose options.
Right.
I do like the approach to export the regular expression syntax used to another standard, to another draft.
Is there anybody else in IETF who is fighting with regular expressions?
Everybody is.
Yeah.
So the most important fight that has happened is in the Yang community, So Yang opted for the XSD, the XML regular expressions, and about half of the community is using those, and the other half of the community is completely ignoring the fact that this is based on XML regular expressions, and are instead writing some Perl, Java, JavaScript, whatever regular expression in there, and hoping that something useful will happen. So that's definitely an unhappy situation. We have various documents like CBOR itself and CDDL that make use of regular expressions in one or the other way, and they would also benefit from having a usable way of talking about regular expressions that don't lead into this Yang disaster.
I'm looking at the JSON path comparison document. Oh, I lost that browser tab. Hold on a second.
So where should I go to?
You know, the C. Bergner document.
Yeah, that's where I am.
Oh, I lost it.
Maybe go to the link on the right-hand side.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
No, the link to the document.
This one?
There. Yeah.
Yeah. It takes a long time to load. That's a symptom right there. But if you just search for, yeah, there it is, right? And well, the picture is, so I mean, here's the cynical point of view. So if we write regular expressions in and specify them in as you know, something like what Carmen provided, our implementer is going to do anything? Are they actually going to go to the work of rejecting regular expressions that they can handle just because the specs, you know, it says so? And just, you know, if I'm thinking of in my previous life as a software team leader, my instinct would be to say, don't use them. Because if you do, you will probably get, you know, surprises when you try and ship it from your Java microservice to your Go microservice.
Yeah. Yeah, because we're narrowly focused on interoperation between JSON path implementations, but there's also a general question which you alluded to just then of using a regular expression in a JSON path and in another context in the same project. It might be quite a complex regular expression. You're trying to maintain them both, so you've got to then massage it into the new standard version and maintain it alongside the well-known, loved programming language version that you're using separately. It's pretty horrendous, isn't it?
And the trouble is that once people start writing JSON paths, there's something that drives them like lemmings towards obscure constructs and pushing the boundaries. Sorry, I'm being cynical here. So I think we could all agree that it would be really wonderful if there were sort of a standard, relatively minimal, broadly interoperable set of regular expressions, which there isn't.
I might ask what exactly is about these extension points Carsten some time ago brought up. Could we? How can I imagine? How can we use them? What exactly is an extension point? Is it something implementers can use exclusively, or is an extension point defined, explicitly defined in the spec? How can we specify that? It's not mentioned in the draft so far, I think. If maybe this would be an issue where we can introduce an example for an extension point.
I think the idea behind providing extension points is to structure the base specification in such a way that implementers expect extensions in a specific place, and that there is somewhat like a obvious way to integrate an extension into the base specification, and that there is a process that actually makes these extensions happen. So when an implementation encounters one, it can find out whether it actually implements that extension, and it's breaking implementations that are not implementing the extension in a more defined way than just randomly changing the syntax after the fact would do. So that can really help both implementers and users, because users have a very specific things they can ask. Do you support extension eggs? And there is a Boolean answer to that, and so you know whether a certain extension point is included in an implementation or not. So we just did this with CDDL, which has a well-defined extension point mechanism, and we now have interoperable implementations of certain extensions. And I think if we just had added them to the grammar, that would have been a problem.
Yeah. So stepping back, I mean, if I could say something like, my implementation is JSON path over RE2, and I'm in Golang, and I'll interoperate with any other JSON path over RE2 implementation, that would be great. You know,
that's a separate issue. What's the policy of actually granting an extension? So we could still say that there will ever only be one regular expression extension.
Yeah, what I'm saying is slightly different. I'm thinking it from the implementer's point of view. If there's a way of declaring that, you know, there isn't an IETF standard for RE2, but if I want a Go implementation to interoperate with another Go implementation, then RE2 is the way to go. For example, just what's there in Go.
You know, another example of this was SGML, the thing that came before XML. SGML had an SGML declaration, and SGML had dozens of optional features. And, you know, at the top of your document, you had a declaration saying which optional features were used. And it was a nightmare. It was a complete nightmare. And of course, the ultimate degenerate case of this craziness is SQL.
Well, SQL is a different situation because there's no defined base standard.
I'll be honest. I think, you know, the statement I would love to be able to make is that any JSON path that conforms to the standard can be processed by any implementation that conforms to the standard, period.
Yeah.
But coming back to the discussion of regular expressions, so I think we do have consensus, and I think we could, I would kind of expect the working group more broadly to agree that if we're going to allow JSON paths, we have to say what we mean.
If we allow regular expressions, we have to say what they mean.
Sorry, yeah, allow regular expressions if we have to say what they mean. And we have one very specific candidate, thank you to Karsten, for what we think we might mean. So
Okay.
I think we should probably go back and get the sense of, okay, so broadly speaking, we have two options. One is no JSON path, A. Option B is, sorry, no regular expression. I've got option A is no regular expression. Option B is, okay, regular expression, but with the full ABNF for the regular expression included.
But included maybe a pointer to a separate document.
So where do extension points fall in that categorization?
I think they're separate from this. I think that we need to conclude, have some clarity over extensions for other reasons other than regular expressions. So that's kind of it's separate.
I agree. I think there's a deep issue about, do we want to allow for extension points, yes or no, and what they would look like if we had them.
Certainly, it would, regardless of the option. So even if we agree that we go for the second option, that doesn't stop implementers wanting to have an extension so that they can use a different regular expression engine, for example.
Okay.
As long as it is a superset of the regular expression in our spec.
Well, that's very unlikely.
Sorry, what's unlikely?
That you can have a superset relationship. I don't think there is a single usable subset of all the viable regular expression flavors that are in use. They're all different in some way that you could not find such a subset. So a subset definition like the one that I attempted in IREGAPS is pretty much always coming with a transformation that tells you how to do an RE2 or a Java or a JavaScript or Perl or whatever regular expression out of the common subset.
I was thinking it's a true subset, a very small subset from those regular expressions listed there.
Yeah, but it gets pretty useless pretty quickly. So if I can't use Unicode characters in a regular expression, I don't care about the mechanism because my world doesn't turn around ASCII anymore.
I think what you mean, Karsten, is Unicode character classes.
Well, first of all, being actually able to write a Unicode character there. And then, of course, the next thing is having classes like letters and.
So I think I disagree. I think that the world is now in UTF-8, or and you can just say that they're written in UTF-8. End of story. So you can put any character you want in.
Yeah.
So I think the interesting case is actually classes.
Okay.
I'm actually working on a different protocol now on another project where somebody proposed using emoji as field separators in assertions. And I thought the idea was crazy, but it seems to just work, all the libraries just, yeah, okay. You can just put it in right there in the join and the split, and then it just works.
So which emoji are you using?
Musical instruments.
Ah, nice.
We have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
We should probably conclude this.
So I think actually we are. I think that we have a sort of a meta consensus that there's a pretty clear choice. Either the regular expressions are fully specified or we don't put them in.
We need to take
Karsten,
that.
do you agree with that?
Yeah, certainly. The question really is what's the specific incarnation of option A? So we could ship a JSON path that doesn't have regular expressions, but that does have extension points where regular expressions could be plugged in later. That would still be A for me.
Well, that assumes we can come to consensus on how extension points work. So suppose hypothetically that we can't. And so A is really just A. No, there's no regular expressions.
Yeah, I agree. So if we don't find a way to do extension points in JSON path, then A is A.
Would it make sense, just as an idea, to get clarity over the extensions before we make this consensus call?
Well, the whole point about the extension point mechanism is that you don't know what those extensions will be.
In terms of extension point capabilities, like, are we going to define extension points that would allow regexes to work or not?
I mean, another thing we have to do is we have to get a few sets of eyes to look carefully over Karsten's proposal and say, okay, do we believe this? And is it, straightforwardly implementable? And could it be made smaller and things like that, right? Because that's relevant. Because I'm not convinced. I'm actually not convinced that you can write down a useful interoperable subset. Karsten is proposing you can, but it's worth, we need to make sure people agree with that.
Yeah, I think we should hear from other implementers.
Yep.
One last agenda item I'd like to discuss before we wrap this up is what are our plans for scheduling the next meeting, and what are our plans for a meeting at IETF 112?
112 is what time zone?
It'll be in Europe this time.
So I think we should probably schedule a meeting, because that's who, I would say that's who we are, but it's not me. So that's who you are, is, it's a very Euro heavy group. So I think we should probably try scheduling one.
Okay.
What do people think?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Do we want to have an interim meeting between now and then?
When is that again?
So it'll be the second week of November for 112.
Second week of November.
I don't think we really have time at this point. What do people think?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll put in, I'll request a slot for 112 then, and we'll then next meet on the week of November 12th. Oh, before November 12th, sorry.
Right.
November 12th.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to bed now.
Thanks for turning out.
Yeah.
I got some notes, James. I'll send them to you. But those notes in
I think Karsten's done an excellent job. Thank you, Karsten.
Yeah, thank you, Karsten. That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for the discussion.
Yeah.
Okay, see you later.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.